Greetings, my friends. This is the first of a series of video sermons I'm going to call Sustainability. The first sermon is about dynamic life. In living, we all want to be successful, and we want the most fruit that we can get from our efforts. It's intuitively obvious to me, but maybe perhaps that's a condition of the world that I was brought up in. But it's been brought to my attention that not everyone understands the dynamic that I'm about to describe. To have dynamic action, you really have to have a clear idea of what it is you want to do. And the clearer your idea, the easier it is to accomplish it, and the more economic your effort will be. Now, that may seem simple enough. However, it wasn't until about the last generation that the idea of getting deep into one's own thoughts appeared in the Western world. The Western world was based on the idea that the key to success in life was all in the dynamic of doing things. It was introduced into the Western world from the Eastern, I think from India, that you could go deep into your mind. You could still your mind and get a very clear insight into the workings of your mind and your deepest thoughts. This was a real revelation to the Western mind, because it was, or the Western world, in that it was built on activity. It was not built on meditation or deep thinking. But honestly, this is a very key ingredient. I'm going to use an illustration that perhaps makes this concept more plausible. You know, Native Americans have an inclination to work with a bow and arrow. If I were to take an arrow and put it in my bow and not pull back very much and just release it, the arrow would not have much energy behind it. It would come out and then fall in a very short distance. But if I were to take that same bow and arrow and pull very, very hard, put a lot of tension into that thing and then release it, the arrow would fly with an incredible dynamic towards its target. This is an analogy for what I saw happening in the Western world. Is they had been pulling back on the arrow only a very small amount and in releasing it. And even though they were getting some results, they weren't getting the kind of results that you could get if you would put an awful lot of depth into your pull. However, something very peculiar happened when this concept of going deep into the thought process and deep into the mind came to the Western world. Some people took it to be the key to the whole thing and spent an awful lot of time just working on that aspect. But honestly, either one of the processes is doomed to failure. If you just engage in in action without a basis of deep thought, your action is going to be not as insightful, not as dynamic, and not as fruitful. However, if you spend all of your time going deep into your thoughts and into your consciousness and into spirituality, you will not, and don't do anything, don't engage in any action, that is also doomed to failure. One is doomed to failure because it doesn't produce action, and the other is doomed to failure because the action is not guided by any real depth. So it is these two working together that really make for a successful, dynamic life. If you have some means in your lifestyle to get deep into yourself, some form of prayer, some form of meditation, some form of introspection, and you use that to, you might say, get the dynamic of pulling back the bow and then releasing that insight in some form of action, the action that you release it into is going to be very successful action. But it is the combination of these two that work. By themselves, neither of them can accomplish much. Action without a deep basis will never be completely fruitful in that it doesn't have a deep basis, and introspection by itself and a deep spirituality without any action produces no fruit. So this is something that I wanted to bring out on the first sermon on sustainability. If you want a sustainable life, you have to consider both aspects, your spirituality and your actual physicality, or your introspection and your dynamicism. After all, we are called humans. Man. Hu represents that aspect of ourselves that we call the spiritual, and man represents that aspect of ourselves which is the dynamic action. We must have these two together to be a full human. So this is the basis of being a sustainable human being. When you have learned the secret, or you've learned the knowledge of being a human, your action, your life will be dynamic and sustainable.